And we are live. All right, so welcome back, everybody. In this instance, we're going to be talking about what is project management, and I'm going to give you my take on defining exactly how it pertains to our daily responsibilities on the job and overall in the grander scheme of things as digital transformation takes over more and more organizations within the automation industry and even other industries as a whole, why project management is becoming more important. This is actually a set of slides I've done a number of years ago, repeatedly actually for many teams. And what I actually like to do, especially when I'm working with a new team, is start holding a series of what are called knowledge cafes, and they're essentially just a very informal way of spreading information. And the intent is rather than trying to capture everything in a written format in order to share, long-standing historical information, you have these frequent sessions where people have the ability to serve as the host and essentially educate their peers on whatever topic they're interested in presenting at hand. Uh, and the term knowledge cafe is actually a little well, one of those fancy words that the Project Management Institute likes to use. I personally happen to also like it, and it really does capture the sort of look and feel for what it means to have one of these sessions. It's essentially just a giant brainstorming session and a free-for-all for who wants to take on initiative and help educate their peers. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So by the end of today's session, you'll be able to understand really how our human brain processes and retains information. Now, it might seem silly at first when we're discussing the broader topic of project management, but you're going to see exactly why that's absolutely pivotal. We're going to define just what a project is. So be prepared. Some of these slides have a lot of verbose information, but don't stress over just how much words are on the slides themselves. A, you'll have copies of them, but B, I just want to have these slides serve more of a reference point for you rather than just um, you know, a mere memorization of every bullet point. So do keep that in mind. We'll be able to explain what project management is, right? It's very different for the project and versus what project management is. We'll be able to explain where project management standards come from because they are in fact standards, just how there are cybersecurity standards following the NIST standards. There are also project management standards. And finally, we'll also understand where and how to research project management skills in order to help educate yourself and others, which I think is probably one of the most important items in our agenda today because really in today's day and age, with highly decentralized, self-organized teams, you're going to need to rely on your teammates and yourself to essentially help teach themselves to a certain degree, and so that's my goal in today's session. So let's get right into the next slide. So how exactly do people learn, right? When we take a look at the human brain, one of the best way, hands down, that our brain retains information is actually in a visual format. So contrary to popular belief, just having a sort of verbal diarrhea of and word salad just all tossed into notes or even on a whiteboard forum is actually not how people best learn things. Now, of course, people have different methods in which uh, that might help them then allow the information to stick. But as far as what actually our brain retain in the ways it retains information and is able to digest and process it best, it's actually visually. And this is the scientific reason for why you have so many billboards on highways and why they do such a damn good job of capturing our attention. One of the best ways actually that humans from a very young age as infants begin to really learn and why certain things exist is the best example is the children's alphabet ball. When you have this little spinning ball that has all the letters of the alphabet, and not only do they sound out each letter, they also give a word that begins with that letter and phonetically sound it out for the child. This is actually a fundamentally scientific toy in nature because the way that people learn isn't just to jump immediately from no knowledge and no foundation whatsoever to, full on experts in, say, software development or say in an automation stack. It's actually on a step by step basis, and each step uh, that precedes it, you build on the step that precedes it. And so in in Japanese culture and philosophy, this is known as shuhari, and it's loosely translates to crawl, walk, run. And it is exactly that in how our brain operates. We first need to establish the basics in anything that we're trying to learn and teach ourselves, or somebody else is trying to teach us. We have to first really start with fundamental basics, then we can build up to another layer of complexity, but we have to ensure that the previous layer is solid first before we go on to doing the next layer. And then once we have that down, then we build on top of that until we get to the running stage. So, this is actually a reason why when it's important to first show somebody how to do something, and then at the beginning stages of the learning process, essentially you're holding their hand, right? This is how some of these colloquialisms exist. You're literally holding their hand, and that person is more or less mimicking you. This is actually stemming from mirror neurons, where not just emotionally, as infants, emotionally, they're able to see faces and pick up and decipher what a mood you're in. And similarly, the parent with the infant is able to depict what mood their infant is in, and therefore provide the appropriate care and respond accordingly. But similarly, we also learn by utilizing these mirror neurons to learn a new set of skills, and our primate ancestors do this as well. Um, Once we're able to essentially follow somebody step by step on what they're doing, we still don't quite yet know exactly why they're doing everything that they are. We just know that all of these things, when combined in the sum of their parts, eventually equals a finished product. But we are getting there. We then begin to learn to explore other avenues by adapting that skill to achieve the same outcome, but in a slightly different fashion. And if that new avenue doesn't necessarily succeed, that's okay. We have the original pathway that was shown to us by the previous person to copy and fall back on. One of the most fascinating things, I think, is when you talk about routines and behaviors. This can actually be a good and bad thing simultaneously, and all at once, and not at all. Where you can have a learned behavior or observed behavior that somebody does that's negative, and they keep following it, and that establishes more and more neural pathways in your brain where your neurons are firing this one particular path, which is why it's so easier for a person to follow that routine. But when they try to maybe establish a new routine, the propensity at which they're likely to continue following that new path is not as high, whereas the propensity to follow the quote unquote beaten path, where there are already stronger neural pathways established, is far easier. And this is how we actually, and not to dive too deep into it, but this is how other psychological issues and particularly addictions can actually form the same way that you and I are trying to dive deeper and learn about project management. Um, the same science is applied to other facets of life. And then, of course, the final step is once you're able to explore these different ways, you go from literally copying the skill step by step to then making it your own, making it unique. And a lot of that has to do with individuation. We often might hear the term Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where somebody self-actualizes into essentially being their own person, having a solid sense of identity and personality traits. So all of that is intermingled. What really also sets apart how well somebody's able to really learn something, when we say somebody has officially learned something or mastered something, it's how well they're also able to have that information stick and be able to process it in a way that they can relate it to tangible examples. And those are very, very important, because somebody can practice something and they might get it really well for a week or two. And if they try to revisit that same skill that they might not have used for quite some time, they will be rusty for it, because again, when we talk about those neural pathways, they're not as strong as other routines that might have been. All right, so now that we kind of have a sort of rough idea of just how our human brains really cohesively come together, let's dive into actually defining just what is a project, right? And before I just kind of read the first sentence of this, because that is literally the only definition of a project, it's important to know that um, all the other things that you might have learned up to this point about what a project is, what project management is, just discard all that, truly. And I say that because a lot of the experiences we have in regards to operations management, projects, project management, corporate strategies, group dynamics are really experiences we have on a cultural and um, basis that are just analogies, not really rooted in the fundamental, social psychology sciences and neurosciences. And it's tough to then um, absorb some of this newfound fundamental scientific information without first just detaching from what you thought you previously know. So basically, what I'm saying is, what you thought you knew, just forget it. It's all wrong. Everything you know is wrong. But seriously, when we talk about a project, just what is a project? Specifically, it's a temporary endeavor, and it's to create value through a unique product, service, or result. Some very key words here, and you'll notice other sort of project management institute isms that will come along. These words are part of that ever-growing list of PMI isms, they're also called, short for Project Management Institute. Create, meaning it's never been done before. Now, it can build on something else, but they're not the same. And the reason for that, totally different point in time, totally different need, and organizationally, the organization has changed, whether it be people who have come in and out of roles, that's one way. The same people, but job titles might be different. Uh, physical, physically, the issue is in a different plant or site. All of this matters. It's very, very important. Um, Temporary. It means it has a definitive start and end date. It does not go indefinite. That is what operations is. The distinguishing point with projects and operations is once a project starts, it also has to finish, and the value the project creates is then tasked onto operations to sustain that value over a period of time or indefinitely. Very important though. Value. This is also very important for other project management concepts we will cover. Value means you're solving a real business need by doing it faster at a higher quality rate, maintaining optimal cost, and it's dictated by the iron triangle, and that's regardless of what um, project management philosophy you apply, whether folks gear towards hybrid, whether they gear towards waterfall, whether they gear towards exclusively agile. All those constraints of cost, aka money, schedule, and quality, those are all very, very important. So again, though, the values can be delivered directly and indirectly. And you essentially, though, at the root of it is you're solving a problem. But that problem might not present itself as clearly as you might have thought. It's not the case, it's not always the case that, say, a VP or a functional manager comes up to you and says, I have XYZ problem, I need you to fix it. Most of the times, actually, the other way around, which is you as an individual, as you're going about your day to day, will come across problems. And, I've talked about the employee of the future before. Uh, the employee of the future really is somebody that's empowered to solve these problems, and the organization simply gives them the tools and resources they need in order to um, solve those problems on their own. And the most optimal way to do that is you form decentralized, self-organized groups and carry out the work necessary to solve the problems. Also, something very important here when we talk about unique, we're talking about also not just the folks who are doing the work, but there's also different stakeholders. The folks that this project will impact are different. Um, and also, even though it might have similar end deliverables as previous projects, the way in which this particular project is carried out might also be different. Um, so yeah, just keep that in mind. All right. So now that we have a idea of what a project is again, just quickly go back. Temporary endeavor to create value through a unique product, service, or result. Hint, hint, that will be a question, a quiz. There will be a quiz at the end, and is going to be one of the answers. So temporary endeavor, create value through a unique product, service, or result. When we talk about project management, what is it? And really, it's the using of the utilization of specific skills, tools, techniques, and also sometimes sort of political art form, if you will, to deliver value, right? We know communications is not all purely scientific. There is what we call the art side of it, which is having an understanding of cul reading the culture of an organization, reading emotions in the room, in the broader department, and just being politically aware of the situation, both physically and metaphorically speaking. And the keywords here in what project management is the word skills, tools, and technique. There are, in fact, when we talk about the Project Management Institute, standards, concrete, scientific-based, clinically evident skills, tools, and techniques standardized by the Project Management Institute, which is the NIST for project management standards, that project management practitioners, are expected to utilize in order to carry out effective, successful projects. And so again, these are very intimately audited and described by what's known as the project management body of knowledge. Sometimes you might hear it as abbreviated as the PMBOK, PMBOK guide. There's different editions. I believe now they're technically still in the 6th edition at the time of this recording. There is sort of a 7th edition where they combine the Agile Practitioner's Guide with the project management body of knowledge. But essentially, these folks get together every so often, and there's a body of them that creates the technical writing, reviews, audits it, and a lot of that work is actually directly reaching out to practitioners and other customers to see, is what we're writing actually useful and doesn't make any sort of sense, or is it just a bunch of fluff that, we're pulling out of thin air. So there is a lot of scientific review that is done to make sure what's captured in the project management body of knowledge is accurate. And it's also not entirely exhaustive and comprehensive. It is comprehensive in that it mostly serves as a reference guide for you to then dive deeper into each topic. And it really, I would describe it better as a giant list that you can use to springboard from in order to dive deeper into each topic. So that is another resource you have access to. Very important here, though, when we talk about skills, tools, and techniques, this is yet another PMI-ism where this isn't something that these aren't things that you sort of pull out where the sun don't shine. Specifically, what I mean here is there is no guesswork, because guesswork is no strategy or method being applied at all. And that is not what project management is at all. So definitely something to keep an eye out as somebody that might be part of a team that's exclusively led by a project manager, part of a project management office, or you yourself are a project manager. There's no room for guesswork. There is a time and place to take a they call it a basis of estimates, where you are rounding on how much something might cost, or how much time you'll have to spend on something. But that is totally different, because even there you're still using scientific analysis to essentially come to that educated estimate. And another one of the isms that PMI has is the particular words, right? So it's a basis of estimates. The basis is fundamental scientific uh, experimentation grounded on statistical analysis. So we talked about some of what the standards are. Yep. Another thing, practitioners, whether you're working with other project managers, or it's just you need to be highly knowledgeable in tailoring your skills for every project. Remember, unique, right? Just because it's in the same industry vertical, in the same department, does not mean that this particular project is the same. It's very, very important that you do not apply a cookie cutter approach. That doesn't mean you have to use every skill, tool, and technique ever known in the entire PMBOK guide in each project. It just means that your approach is not going to work for each one. And it is up to you as a professional to figure that out. So we'll go on to the next step here. So we have a definition of what a project is, right? Temporary, unique endeavor, create value. And we have our definition of project management, right? Where, again, just for ease of reference, we use specific knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to deliver that value. And again, one of the things I didn't cover in this slide is when we use the term specific knowledge, this is where you're expected to have the relevant technical industry knowledge, right? So if you're a software developer, you should know what the software development lifecycle is and other software architectures, and how all of that relates to the particular, say, product that you own or the department that you're working with. So again, yet another one of the PMI isms. And you'll notice that all of these principles thus far and these definitions are not industry specific, right? This isn't like you can't use any of these in, say, construction, or in automobile manufacturing. These are industry neutral, and they're also solution stack agnostic, vendor neutral. So principles I've talked about before in digital transformation equally apply here in project management. So anyway, progressive elaboration. So what this means is essentially we are applying when we do work, we're applying information that we learn from just doing that iteration of work and making sure that the next time we are partaking in doing more project work, it is much more effective and we are getting that much closer to delivering and fixing the actual issue our customers have. And this is important because, a lot of traditional project management methodologies were exclusively you plan everything up front as if to say nothing is going to change and everything will absolutely go to plan, which literally never happens in the real world. And the 0.0001% of the time it does happen. You're a unicorn. Please capture that particular project in bottle and make sure that the rest of the world doesn't get its hands on it because you belong in a museum. But again, that is not how the real world happens. And it's much more than just not going to the plan. It's also educating and capturing sort of tribal knowledge that we come across in learning about how our team operates with each other, learning more about how our organization at this point in time operates and maybe facilitates or doesn't facilitate collaboration. All that is equally important when we talk about progressive elaboration. And again, it's because there is really no absolute certainty. And when we talk about one of the, again, going back to the PMI-ism of unique, different point in time, potentially different people, or potentially same people, but different job titles, physical location might be different. Um, those are all key factors, again, to keep in mind. You have to work through what that means. And the people that your project in the end impacts are potentially also different. You're also expected to repeatedly visit and redefine just what the project is actually setting out to deliver and the problems trying to solve. This is very important because again, with agile philosophy really taking hold in our modern times. And personally, I think it's for the better. It's breaking away from this age-old mindset that you plan everything, nothing ever changes according to the plan, and you stick with the plan. And when you're gathering requirements, it's common practice now. And actually, my cohort, when I had to take the PMP exam, it was actually the first cohort to actually get tested on the Agile Practitioner's Guide and the Agile philosophies and other Agile techniques. And before that, the whole step of actually gathering requirements was something that was really done once, but it needs to be done iteratively. And however long you have those iterations where you're doing this kind of work and coming back with the team is dependent on your organization. PMI doesn't really give any specific guidelines to that. It's something that's uh, up to you to figure out. But you really need to make sure that you're proactively getting stakeholder feedback. You're not sort of waiting for it. That is oftentimes something that folks, regardless of whether they're practicing a agile or a disciplined agile methodology or not, it's important that you, as the project manager, are proactively capturing that at every point in time. Um, Equally important here is to make sure that you don't sort of get trapped in this paralysis by analysis, where there is, in fact, scientific found a basis for what some of us might know as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where essentially, the more you try to analyze something, the more it changes, therefore leading to further analysis being required so that you get a better understanding of what the current state is. And it's a vicious cycle that quite literally has no end. So make sure that as you're doing this analysis, you get it to a point where from customer feedback that you get in your own in your own expertise as an individual project manager, as well as the collective consensus of your group, comes to an agreement that, yes, could it be absolutely more perfect, but this actually meets the requirements and solves the business need that our customer has. So just keep that in mind. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is a very real thing in progressive elaboration, and to not take the iteration work to an infinite degree, just to a properly adequate and degree of times. So just a little visual here to show you what the difference between projects and operations. Again, we've talked about it, but just to reiterate, you have to, establishing that sticking factor here. Temporary, it's new, it's unique output, and once the objectives are met, you stop, right? So once you deliver on what your requirements said that you need to deliver, that's it, right? Now, that maintaining of the value shifts over to operations, which is ongoing daily work. It's repeated. It's the same output, which is the value that you created from the project. And the outputs of the project actually become operations. So you'll see in another slide, we have different uh, project management plans, right? That even still apply in the agile way of working, and the outputs of those become part of operations. But the key point here is projects are outputs to operations, and it's shifting a little bit, but really not much. And it might seem like a sort of deceiving statement of what I'm about to say next regarding operations, but really, when you fundamentally look at the difference between projects and operations, operations does not deliver anything new or unique, and operations also never ends. This does not have anything to do with folks that work in operations, and has nothing to say about what their value as a individual employee is. This is broadly in the manner in which operations, in terms of work, fundamentally operate, fundamentally exists, is far different than unique endeavors taken on by projects. Okay, so it's not to say that the value delivered by one project is always going to remain the same for the next 10, 15, and 30 years. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Um, but simply that their responsibilities are different. And it's often the case too. And, this phrase of operations does not deliver anything new. Um, in these buckets of work, operations truly does not deliver anything new. When an issue comes up, folks on that work in operations will actually then band together to create a project charter leading to the birth of a project. We'll cover that a little bit later. And then their end result is a unique output. And then sustaining the value comes back to operations. So it's not that the folks who, as individuals, work in operations do not provide any value or are useless. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying that fundamentally, the responsibility of operations to simply maintain the value, and oftentimes it's actually used as a catch-all for quality issues that then create a positive feedback loop into spurring new projects to make the organization better, make the product better, change fundamentally how collaboration is done. So it is a very important distinguishing feature, though, when we talk about projects and operations. Projects are outputs to operations, and operations never end and do not deliver anything new or unique. All right, so the sphere of influence. Again, this is actually taken from the PMBOK guide textbook. this essentially is a really nice visual for how a project manager, a team of project managers, radiates for their political influence, the manner in which their work itself, on a technical basis, impacts folks within the organization. And you can really see here, while you might think to yourself, wow, the particular project I'm working on might not be that large and might not really matter to all that many people. Most of the time, it's actually not the case at all. It's the work you do has huge ripple effects. The butterfly effect is absolutely real when we talk about managing projects. And so, you know, your analysis of one technical component really has rippling effects all throughout the organization. So just do keep in mind that really the takeaway from this is how important it is to engage your stakeholders, not just once at the beginning of the project or even before the launch of a project, but throughout the entire life cycle of the project, and especially even in operations, it's important to continue maintaining that contact and that interaction with stakeholders. Okay, take some water here. So, some example factors. We've talked a little bit about this before, but examples of what things lead to the creation of a project, right? New technology. I mean, especially in automation, talk about MQTT, Sparkplug. Even though Ignition isn't really new, the ways in which its prevalence in facilities, at least for many organizations, is quite new, and its capabilities compared to other proprietary vendor lock specific solution stacks. That is a possibility for new projects. Competitive forces, right? You got to stay competitive in this global market to remain in business. Uh, Material issues, aka yield, quality, political changes, people's jobs, etc., economic changes, whether there's, recession and so forth. This is just a nice reference to have for some of the many ways in which a project can uh, eventually come about. Equally important here is this really great reference slide for the types of organizations um, that you might see, and specifically the hierarchy and the social and political and power dynamics you might come across in organizations. Um, this is probably one of the nicer, more comprehensive, and I would say exhaustive tables that the PMBOK guide provides. It's actually quite unique because that's not really something the Project Management Institute does, to provide something that's exhaustive and comprehensive. But this is one of those rare golden nuggets that it does just that. And it's not to say that one organization, has to absolutely fit one of these. It tends to be the case. They usually fit a few, but there are defining traits that a startup has that, say, a more established legacy manufacturing company um, does not have, or it might have, but in sort of more isolated pockets. And it's very important that you be aware from a scientific perspective on just how it is that your particular organization, your department fits more broadly and in a microcosm level. So it's very, very important. All right. So, and again, the reason why I didn't really cover that slide all that much is it's really quite self-explanatory. um, Primarily because, let's really go back to it. Primarily because it covers sort of these power dynamics you might encounter and who has more authority in certain decisions, who has less authority, access to resources. Essentially, that's really the defining, well, at least one of the key defining uh, points of being a project manager. You need you're essentially operating with constricted resources. Your personnel might change, not just, intangible resources, be it machines, but people resources might change, and political climates internally might change, and it's just great to have this reference so you can better understand where you fit. More often than not, tend to find organizations be in a weak matrix organization where specifically a project even though your business case and need can come from this the stakeholders that you are going to ultimately be serving and beholden to, and you might have authority in potentially even drafting a project charter, um, to actually ratify that charter and get legitimate funding. It has to be approved by some other direct line of management or executive management or a C-level suite person. And oftentimes you'll see that there's really no input that exists from the time that the charter was approved, ratified, and given money to, uh, when it's eventually handed to the project manager and the team. You're just sort of given a green light, and there's not much interaction between the folks doing the project work versus the folks that happen to sponsor it. But just something to keep in mind, not every place is like that. And a PMO also has very unique traits and very special use cases depending on your organization and your political climate. So some of these topics are really can be their own video entirely, so I won't dive too much into this. But when we talk about projects, programs, and portfolios, right, there is in fact a relationship with all of them. And the biggest one is that they all tie into one another. So, right, projects are temporary. Programs really is how do you relate each of these individual programs to then extract value from them all that is greater than the sum of their parts. And feeding into this, more systematic way of managing all of these, um, all these things are happening, which is exactly what portfolio management is. And when we look at their definitions too, right? Program is a series of related projects, or even other subsidiary programs and program activities, and you coordinate those that again is greater than the sum of their parts. And a portfolio, you take the collective of projects, programs, and even other portfolios, as well as operations. So this is the unique thing. Programs often do not include, programs do not include operations, but portfolios do. And it's to achieve a strategic objective. And again, going back to greater than the sum of their parts. So, one of the most important things here is really what's driving how all of these interact with each other is your strategy, your organizational strategy. And when we talk about digital transformation, we know for sure, each organization will need to create their own, but there are absolutely scientific principles that dictate what a strategy cannot be, right? It cannot be vendor biased. It cannot be driven by a proprietary solution stack offered by an OEM, or one monolithic ERP uh, product implementation, right? That is not a strategy. Um, in digital transformation, a strategy is not closed architecture, right? Which is to say that there's no open source community, there's no meaningful engagement with other companies that are also trying to utilize the same product or tool to solve a very similar problem. Those are things that a strategy cannot be. And it's important that a strategy, as it's being defined, is actually is a collaborative effort rather than just a top-down approach. So as you're looking at this picture, this does not mean that the top layer in an organization, aka a C-level board of directors, is driving the strategy. Not at all. This is just simply a nice visual that just so happens to fit nicely in this landscape format of a slide. But it does not mean that one is subservient to the other and one is more dominant and has more power and say. That is absolutely not what this slide indicates at all with these arrows. So that's very, very important to keep in mind. Um, Also very important that your strategy is not at all investor related, and it's a very common problem organizations make. Strategic plan has nothing to do with investors. Investors are investors. That is simply it. They have no say in the operations of the organization. They do funnel money into the organization and in direct and indirect ways, but they're not actually there doing the project work, nor are they there working in operations, right, to maintain the value outputted from projects. So super important, but straightforward. Strategy is not investor related whatsoever. Um, I'll leave it at that. Talked a little about the iron triangle here. No matter what philosophy you take, every type of project work you're going to do, doubly so also in operations as you try to maintain the value of the project, you're essentially going to be bound by the three core points: scope, cost, time. And how much you stretch in one direction or the other will impact your quality, which is why it's at the center there. So very straightforward, I think, when you think of cost, resources, budget, time, right, schedule, and scope, the level of functionality and features it will have. What's really what I want you to get out of this slide is regardless of the project, regardless of the methods used to the work, and regardless of the intended income, every person in project is bound by the iron triangle, bound ultimately by these constraints. Not theory of constraints, these constraints. Um, Here, it's also important to take yet another PMI-ism, which is that you define first what it is you're trying to do rather than, well, actually, let me not get into that. The way that a project scope gets defined is that it actually gets defined first. So what you're trying to achieve and the features and functionality you're trying to build get defined first. Meaning there's no mention of money or how long it will take at this point. None of that. You're just simply you really the first step is you define what your scope is. This then, right, very important, yet another one of those things that you really have to forget how organizations do it, um, because it just really doesn't work. And um, we'll get to that in another bit, but scope is created first, right, where you're trying to deliver on features and functionalities first. Then this sets the schedule by breaking an exhaustive list of tasks necessary to be accomplished in order to meet the scope. Then finally, this cost is set last because each of those tasks take a certain amount of time to do, but a certain amount of money is being spent per task carried out over time. This often is um, analyzed in traditional waterfall project management using earned value management. It's another topic that requires its own video, but I've written an article about it, talking about project costing. However, the agile equivalent are burn rates and burn down charts. So uh, there are analytical equivalents. So it does not mean that the iron triangle does not apply, and it does not mean that, setting a scope is first, and then schedule being set by the scope, and then the cost being set because a certain amount of in an agile case, it's not um, a unit of money that is spent, but instead a unit of um, full-time hours or person hours required to achieve that particular feature. So very important distinction, uh, caveat there. Moving on. This is what's called the project process groups, and I actually happen to really like this table here. I did not make it. This was actually a chart I ran into with my then trainer as I was taking the PMP prerequisite course. And really, it breaks down each of the uh, process groups and as well as the steps that go on in each of them. And if you were to sort of expand each of these, and I have personally made another set of slides that expands each of these different these different numbered items, it will there's a bunch of stuff that goes into doing each of these. It's not like this is something that, when we talk about tools and techniques, that's what's actually going on in order to make each of these steps successful. But really, what I want you to focus your what I want you to focus your attention on here is we have 5 process groups known as initiating, planning, executing, monitor, controlling, closing, and 10 knowledge areas, integration all the way down to stakeholders. And there are a total of 12 management plans in the traditional waterfall approach. And all of these have outputs that eventually get shifted into operations to maintain their value. I won't go through each of them, but you can see some of these management plans here. We have plan quality management, plan risk management, procurement management, stakeholder, and there are some that are hidden in here. Believe it's 2 or 3 that you do not see directly in the table of process groups. But I'll let that sort of be a little brain teaser. It won't be covered in the quiz at the end, but they are in fact a management plan that aren't directly listed by the process group chart. However, they are equally important part of the output in operations. How do projects get done? We've talked about this. Agile, waterfall, which is traditional plan, do, check, act, hybrid, combining. I happen to actually prefer I happen to like calling it disciplined agile, which is hybrid, but it's a little bit more nuanced. Really traditional, actual like true agile is highly chaotic, and sort of everything is up to change at every point in time. And it's a philosophy that just is way too abstract and way too ethereal, too pie in the sky kind of thing. And the Agile Practitioner's Guide makes heavy use of disciplined agile in order to teach how this stuff actually gets used in the real world. So I call it disciplined agile. Um, but equally important to understand with agile, if we take a look at our process groups, just really quickly, see all of these management plans. This is all done up front. All this is work that's done up front. There's a sequential order, right, from initiating to planning to executing and so on. Traditionally, you do all this planning work first before you ever take in a step to actually do any sort of work. Not how Agile works at all. There's a good enough mindset. You take a rough set of requirements and you essentially just build upon that and you iterate through um, delivering chunks of small features to the customer, get feedback, and then come back and build yet another working function and see if that still meets what your customer is looking for. Again, with the caveat that there's also some technical know-how where um, more about what your customer may not know they need, but you can see that it is in fact a need, and that's one of their blind spots. So yeah, let's go ahead and brush through that. Who pays for projects? So the work is actually done again by a project team, usually led by a project manager or managers. Um, there's really three types of leadership as the project manager or managers are steering their teams to success. There's a servant leader who is really there to complement the team and empower them to collaborate with each other and make decentralized decisions, um, which is especially helpful in instances that you have very complex work that needs to be carried out, because if you have to, fill out another form for any minor change, that absolutely prevents a roadblock in the grander scheme of things and the overall success of the project. So, servant leader takes somebody that's highly adept, not just in their technical knowledge, but in their levels of emotional intelligence, empathy, interpersonal dynamics, and interpersonal relationships, and can essentially help people come together to, achieve something of greater good to everybody, not just the team, but the organization as well. Authoritative is very traditional, often seen in military rank and file. There's a top-down approach. Steps X, Y, Z have to be done in this particular order. You do that. There's really no back and forth discussion. I tend to personally not like this at all. There is a time and place for it, um, which is something that's, running theme and yet another PMI-ism. There sort of is and is not a definitive time to use absolutely only one skill all the time. You essentially have to use all of them all the time. And it's up to your judgment, but that's authoritative and hybrid. Of course, you sort of mix the two, which is the more realistic approach. Depending on the stakeholder and depending on the team, you need to make use of these different leadership approaches. Key uh, key definition, yet another PMI-ism. When we use words like responsibility and accountability, people often use those interchangeably. It's not the case. Not the case at all for project management. Responsibility and responsible in scientific terms for PMI means many, as in many people are responsible for ensuring that something gets done. Every project can, but accountable means only one person is actually held, it has their feet held to the fire when something is ultimately not done or failed, or even succeeded. Um, Specifically, the project manager, their primary measurement of success is whether they're proactively engaging the stakeholders throughout the entire project lifecycle. And that is something that only the project manager is accountable to. While team members are responsible for making sure stakeholders are engaged, again, a lot of this is diving into the agile way of working. Um, if team member forgets, they're not the ones whose feet get held to the fire, and rightfully so. The project manager needs to make sure that they are clued into and sort of walking the beat, just like cops do, to understand what is exactly going on at the organization. And it's no small feat um, within this particular project, within the broader organization as a whole, competitively within the market. That is something that you are accountable for as a project manager or team of project managers. Um, and if you have a team of project managers, you need to be very clear about who specifically is accountable for engaging certain stakeholders. If there's, say, prior relationships and camaraderie that you might have built, prior to this project. So very, very important that you hash that out at the beginning rather than, way later in the stages of work. Funding is ultimately provided by a sponsor. Um, Project charter marks the official birth of a project, and you as the team are beholden to the sponsor. And it can be a huge point of contention where you have a customer, you see a problem of theirs as it's stated by their own words is clearly not the actual issue at hand, but you get sponsored and get a charter approved by them to do XYZ bits of work. Do you continue delivering on that work when you clearly can see that it won't, you know, actually solve their problem or meet their needs? And to that, I say you need to make sure that you do actively have these conversations, and they are very tough conversations with stakeholders and sponsors. Hey, we can deliver this amount of value in this area, but really overall in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to solve your problem. I think we need to have another pass at understanding at actually taking requirements and for you to also hear us out for what we actually see from doing an iteration of work in what your problems truly are versus what you've stated they are. And similarly, the project team will have blinders on what they are able to perceive as real needs and issues that our organization has versus what an organization knows it has and what it thinks it has as problems. But it is our regulatory and ethical duty as a project team and project managers to meet and satisfy sponsor demands, right? If there is no leeway in, those conversations of, well, you know what? Yes, we understand that we still want you to deliver on XYZ. You then have to make a decision. Do you continue working on it, or do you disband the project, regardless of whether it has sponsorship or not? That is a choice that you will have to make as part of as the project manager. Historical information, aka tribal knowledge, right? One of the great ways to share that information is through knowledge cafes like this. But really, background and a context for any project is important. Companies actually have a huge wealth of historical information through many mediums, staff members, right, your fellow coworkers, coworkers in other departments, documents, prior projects, current or anticipated projects, patents, etc. Some even have knowledge databases where they've stored, you know, previous engineering notebooks or process information on a particular product and so on. So all that is a way that you can go and learn more about what happened before so that you can not only learn from those problems were incurred, but to make you and your team that much more successful in this particular project. Um, Really important here, though, it's very easy to uh, get really carried away by this. Oh, let me learn everything there is to absolutely know about the past. No, no, no. The past is important, but think back to what we defined our project to be. It's unique. So yes, the past is important, but this is now. They are not the same, which is to say, don't live in the past. I mean, seriously, people really get hung up on this, and this is how innovation gets stifled. This is how collaboration amongst teams and departments just absolutely gets decimated. Past is important. You learn from it, take the good with the bad, but this is now. Um, there's there's also a resource called OPA's Organizational Process Assets and Analogous Estimating that you can use at your disposal. This is when we were talking about basis of estimates, how much something is going to cost, how much time it's going to take. Again, past information. These also can merit um, their own videos. But if you were to look in the PMBOK guide on the index and look at the definitions and how organizational process assets and what falls under that, it's really just a list, right? More than just documents and the list I have here of documents from prior projects. They have other things like vendors used in the past, bits of software or other technologies and tooling. So check that out in the PMBOK guide as you see fit. Super important to know with project management. There's two types of knowledge. There's really a third, but really these are more or less the most important ones. Tacit and explicit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is what you personally know, and it's through lived experience, and it's through research you might have done on your own as a professional, or even other potential experiments that you've done on your own free time, DIY activities and the like. And they're very difficult to articulate and document. Examples are beliefs, values, lived experience, industry insight, right? You've ran a project with a certain machine, even though it's the same model line at your current company as it was in your previous company. They still might operate a little differently, but to actually, jot that down in so many words and um, is very, very difficult. The way you overcome that is through knowledge cafes. This is the best and only way to really successfully overcome that issue of sharing tacit knowledge. Really, that's the tribal knowledge that often goes away once somebody leaves. Explicit knowledge, easily documented in words, pictures, audiobooks, etc. uh, Machine operator manual, specifically how to change a belt. That's pretty straightforward. You know, the belt is the belt is the belt. It's made out of XYZ materials. It has to be this particular length, width. The grooves have to be this particular shape. It's very clearly defined, and there's no two ways about it. Chemistry equations, math equations, right? The equation is the equation. The variable is defined, or the variable is defined. Textbooks also, right? A lot of calculus textbooks, perfect example of this. When we take a look around what percentages are what percentage of knowledge overall in humans exists as uh, now that we know these two categories, is it tacit or explicit? 95%, which is say pretty much all of it is tacit knowledge. This is why it's so important to understand how the brain operates, so you can then share sort of cultural learnings with your fellow peers, understanding the political climate to better understand how the information you're trying to relay and how you're trying to help somebody that can actually stick, right? You might want to relay a certain bit of information, but you need to do it in a way that somebody else can actually um, take it and run with it. And it really makes a sticking point rather than just are you trying to share this information with them because it's meeting your own some sort of own personal need, right? That is something you have to take into account as you're mentoring or working with other people. Yes, you might be right, but how do you relay that in a way that makes sense to that person? In a way that, again, talked about this word before, is done in a conducive, pro-social, constructive manner. And sadly, for the reasons of we define now, there really can never be a central single place where knowledge is captured. So many organizations try to do this, and it's just impossible. You just can't. You can try. Knowledge cafes are, undoubtedly the best and only way to capture as much of that as possible, but it's never going to be 100%, It's actually a futile effort and endeavor to take and try to capture all that because you're just doing yourself a big disservice, wasting a lot of time trying to document absolutely every facet of life like that. You're not. And actually, that's why, things like video recording a certain session in a software development lifecycle is better documentation than forcing the developer to, try to type up a step-by-step itemized manual for, hey, this is how I did this particular line of code. This is why I named XYZ variable that at this particular point in time over, that's just, it's, you need to really be mindful of that. You just can't capture everything. There are some things you can absolutely capture, and there's a balancing act of how much time and do I want to invest in this thing to document it to the absolute T, and what kind of knowledge am I even trying to document, right? If it's tacit knowledge, then it's something that can really only best be captured in a knowledge cafe type of scenario. If it's explicit knowledge, how to install the software, it's a heck of a lot more straightforward. So, final point I wanted to make here, though, just because there's no central, it's very important, and I've been guilty of doing this before, but just because there's no central repository of all knowledge ever within a company, this never, and I repeat, listen very closely, this never justifies, and it does not mean uh, that everything can be totally disorganized. It does not mean, and it does not mean justifying why things are totally disorganized. Uh, we use this as a design principle in how we organize, rather than just saying, oh, you know what, it's complicated, everything's tacit knowledge, psh, forget about it. No, no, not at all. This slide is something that, definitely merits its own video, but there are it's not just a PMI-ism, it's a fundamental scientific fact grounded in social psychology and neuroscience. You know, Leadership uses different parts of the brain rather than management. And the scientific definition that PMI issues for management, really, it's nothing more than reading this out loud. Management, something most people, if given some minor training, can do. And it's because all that it takes is to simply plan, organize, and control resources to achieve specific goals that are repeatable. And it's only focused on providing analysis and technical reports on project performance, which is to say that you have a list of resources. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, just want to back up for a second. That doesn't mean that just because you are a manager that by default, and then somebody can do management related things, that doesn't automatically default you to being a good and effective manager. So very different there. But it's very easy in that it's an innate thing humans do, where when we have a set of resources that we're restricted by in quantity, they're discrete, naturally our human brains take over and we want to make the best and most efficient use out of those resources as possible. So essentially that's what management is. You have some resources itemized in a list, and you basically have to make the most optimal use of them and ensure that you're not wasting much more than is necessary, and you spend it in an allotted time, and any extras is given back as a surplus for a backlog, or excuse me, as a surplus that's potentially able to be used on another project. So, leadership. What is leadership? It's the ability to use emotional intelligence, exercise a cultural awareness, grasp social science, aka neuroscience, social psychology, and understand political currents to inspire change in individuals and in groups. The primary function is to inspire change and rally under a common shared vision. Your performance as a leader is evaluated on how well people understand the change, how well they are supported throughout the change, and how positively and negatively the change impacts the business. Anyone can manage, not everybody can lead. And really, when we take a look at the measurement of success in management and leadership, it's that third bullet point. You're evaluated as a leader on how well people understand the change that you're trying to impart, how well they are supported through the change, and the positive and negative effects that the change will have, because it will have both. It always will have both. And most of your time as a leader, you should be spent on education, really, because people are going to look to you for, hey, how does this fit into the grand scheme of things? That takes education. I mean, it always has, but it's something need to be very cognizant of, right? Education, education, education. These two abilities do need to be used in conjunction by a project manager to ensure project success. A project manager cannot ensure the overall success of a project. Again, if we go back to the slide about what truly is a project manager accountable for, it's to be proactive and engage the stakeholders appropriately throughout the entire life cycle of a project. That is absolutely always and the only one thing project manager is accountable for. But they do need to use management and leadership in conjunction at every point in time throughout the project lifecycle to ensure its success. Doesn't mean it's going to be guaranteed, even with the best management and best leadership ability of a project manager, team of project managers. You can still have crappy outcomes, but this is ensuring the likelihood that it will not be that. And if you do this, you have a higher propensity to, if you truly practice management and leadership, there is a higher propensity to then learn from past mistakes if you truly are a emotionally intelligent, um, culturally aware, and open-minded person rooted in social science. Then more likely than not you have a higher propensity to learn from your mistakes and do better, and not just for yourself, for, again, talking about pro-social development. It's in service for everybody as well as yourself. Um, one can't exist without the other, right? I mean, I think this is a pretty self-explanatory slide, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but um, there is a there anyone can manage, not everyone could lead. So with that, we're coming up to the end of our slides here. So normally I'd have a live audience, but if we're to look at the definitions, right, of what a project is, temporary unique endeavor creates a unique outcome, product, service. And if we were to go all the way back in our slides here, what's project? Temporary endeavor, create value through unique product, service, or result. Project management, use a set of skills, tools, and techniques to effectively organize resources to deliver value. Going back just to make sure that we are correct. What else? Project management, right? Specific knowledge, skills, tools, and technique to deliver value. Should have also added specific knowledge here to the keywords, but again, oh, our brain first. This is talking about how our brain learns. So, right, we first ingest information, then we digest and process it, and we do that visually. Uh, the organization that creates the international standard for project management is called Project Management Institute. Things that make a project unique are, and this has several answers to it, but again, different people potentially, or same people, different job titles, physically different location, or physically same the location but different, uh, physical environment, right? Weather could be the same, weather can be different, night and day, which obviously also impacts the mood that folks are in. life circumstances those folks might have had. Very important. And that really wraps this things up here. I hope you found great value out of this, and I hope it really serves as a reference point for you to be able to come back to anytime you need a potential refresher on the fundamentals. You know, they're so important. The fundamentals of what project management is. It's very crucial, but these are some very valid, legitimate, scientific resources you can use to dive deeper into some of the topics we talked about in this presentation. And of course, in other future videos, I will be making recordings to, cover those in more in depth. But Dr. Sidkey in particular, he's also written a book, not that I'm sponsored by him or in any way, shape, or form, that talks, he had a major hand in making the Agile Practitioner's Guide and also putting together the Agile Consortium. Check him out. He actually does have great uh, videos on Agile, some of which are actually training seminars he's done with other organizations, all for free on YouTube. There's the Agile Alliance website, which again, Dr. Sidke had a major part in. Got the PMBOK guide, Agile Practitioner's Guide. Final thoughts, really. I've said this before. Operations and projects and project management are not a black box. There are things that are, again, there's skills, techniques, and tools, which is, it's not guesswork, it's legitimate stuff, okay? It's scientific, just like when we learn about material science, just like as we're learning about a particular software programming language, there's legitimate stuff that goes into it in order to have a desired outcome. It is not a black box. I mean, it saddens me when people think it's this ethereal thing that they either can never learn or, learn sort of through wrong encounters with folks that had really no place in educating folks about operations project management. And they try to run with, personal analogies and cultural experiences I might have had without any scientific grounding whatsoever. It's not to say that those are invalid, but it's absolutely important that the basis of success is that we start fundamentally with empirical evidence, scientific empirical evidence, and then we can build up on that through lived experience and cultural analogies and so forth. But project management is not a black box. There are, in fact, scientific principles behind it, and there are, in fact, legitimate, non-biased avenues to learn more about what it means to effectively implement those scientific techniques for your particular circumstances and needs in your particular team. But that's really it. It's not a black box, never has been, never will be, and shame on those that try to shill products or services that try to, make project management very mysterious and make operations very mysterious. It's not like that at all. So yeah, I hope this helped demystify project management projects for you. And till next time, we'll see you guys later.